He's one of the industry's most respected executive recruiters. He's the founder and CEO of the DEDIC Group and the host of DEDIC TV, Jason DEDIC.
Hello everybody, my name is Jason DEDIC and you're listening to DEDIC TV. Today I have a great interview for you. He has over 30 years experience in the energy industry and has been involved with everything from natural gas, electric power and coal to LNG. He's run both asset-based and commodity trading organizations and has served on energy-related boards for the past 7 years. He was the regional president for NRG, the chief operating officer for Dynegy. He's currently on the board of directors for the Atlantic Power Corporation and the chairman of the board for the Illinois Power Generating Company. It's a pleasure to have Kevin Howell on DEDIC TV. Kevin, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today.
No, I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
With DEDIC TV, there's multiple topics that I like to discuss with executives. One of them is leadership. It's one of the most important aspects to run an organization and to get people to follow your direction. So how do you inspire and motivate people to follow your direction within an organization?
I actually think that's a lot simpler than the question would imply. I think the most critical thing you can do in an organization is to actually model the behaviors that you're asking the team to follow. I've been in a lot of organizations where they've got a lot of cute posters in the break room that say, these are the attributes we value, but the leaders actually don't exhibit those values. So I think the critical thing you'd have to do is just actually model the behaviors you're asking the whole team to exhibit. And then the second thing, I think you just need to be visible. I've been around a lot of leaders that spend their entire day in their office and really don't get out and get input from the employees about what's going on in the company or what can be done better at the company.
How do you motivate an organization to execute as a whole versus just individual direction or being in front of one person, but to really make that whole organization work together?
Well, I think that really gets down to the culture of the organization. And every organization has a culture, whether you like it or not. And so I simply ask, are you fostering a culture of teamwork and respect? Do you model those behaviors yourself? And is that culture part of your daily dialogue? Is it part of your annual goal setting process? I think employees can kind of smell through that fairly quickly, as if you really believe in the culture you're asking for, or is it just some buzzwords that you like to put up?
Mm-hmm. When you look back at your career, Kevin, what's the toughest decision that you've had to make?
I don't know if I would really describe it as tough, but I do find it really challenging when you're running a part of the organization that's performing really well. You get your group hitting on all cylinders, and then all of a sudden you're asked to kind of give that up and move into another part of the organization that may be struggling. And, I've done that several times in my career, and I always do it with some apprehension. I feel like I'm kind of giving up my baby when I give up the part of the organization that I've spent time getting to run well. But when you go over and take on a new challenge in the other part of the organization and you're able to get good results there over time, I find that extremely rewarding. So the first few times in my career when I did that, I did it with quite a bit of apprehension, but later in my career, I actually started seeking out those opportunities.
When you are bringing new people into an organization, whether they are another senior executive vice president, or so on, or even if it's a recent college graduate, what do you look for in that person outside of technical capabilities?
Well, I think it's critical to find people that have a kind of a demonstrated history of setting goals and then achieve those goals. And even with a recent graduate, did they set the goal to graduate in 4 years, and did they do it? The other thing I look for is people who are just curious by nature. I'm always struck by how many people in the organization are so engrossed in their little sliver of the pie that they have no curiosity about how the company really operates in its totality or even where it makes money at. So I'm always on the hunt for people that are just kind of curious by nature. And then the last piece I look for a good mix of IQ and EQ. And in cultures where you're really trying to foster teamwork, I think EQ can sometimes actually be more important than IQ.
Mm-hmm. One of the major hot topics right now in business, not just our business, but really business in America, is the sense of corporate responsibility. What are your views, Kevin, on corporate responsibility, and what role should an organization play in contributing back to their community?
I think the first place I look at is at the communities we serve. What is their makeup, and does our company reflect that makeup from a diversity standpoint? I think that's one of the most important ways to actually be involved in your community is make sure you look like your community. And then secondly, I really believe that your community giving opportunities should be kind of employee up driven. I think if you are trying to do all of that from a corporate role and a headquarters that's remote from a lot of the activity, I think you're missing some real opportunities to get involved in the community. And lastly, I really look for opportunities to get out and volunteer in the community. And by that, I mean giving the employees an opportunity to go out as a team during their regular work time and volunteer in the community.
What do you think companies do right, and what do you think companies do wrong in this area?
Well, like I just said, I think the ones that do it wrong are the ones that try and manage it all at a corporate headquarters someplace, and they have one or two people trying to drive their whole community involvement. I think you're much better if you kind of disperse it out into your field locations and look for opportunities for the employees to identify, opportunities to either give back to the community or volunteer in the community.
Another issue that I like to talk about is government regulations and the impact that it has on business, whether it's good or bad. In your opinion, what role should the government play in the private sector?
I've always been a big fan of the old saying, there's no such thing as deregulation, there's only re-regulation.
Right.
All industries are regulated, and I do think there's a role for government to provide oversight on the private sector, especially through agencies like the Securities and Exchange Commission or the Environmental Protection Agencies. And a lot of those efforts are actually duplicated at the state level as well. Since I'm in the utility space, you also have the state level public utility commissions that are there to ensure any new investments are in the public best interest.
What impact has either the government or the EPA had on organizations that you've worked for in the past?
Well, and I'll focus on the power industry. And there's no disputing that the power industry is much cleaner from an emission standpoint than it was 25 years ago. And that's largely due to kind of this evolving regulatory landscape. And that regulatory landscape is going to continue to evolve. And so I think the power industry will be cleaner, 15 years from now than it is today.
How should an organization set itself up to confront increasing regulations? How should they work? How should business and government work together?
I'm actually a big fan of the old saying that if you're not at the table, you're probably on the table.
Right.
So I think the companies, you just need to be proactive in trying to shape that framework with an eye towards compromise if you really want to have any influence.
You had touched earlier on corporate culture, which is something that I want to dig a little bit deeper in. How have you created cultures within organizations that you've worked for, and how important is that culture to the overall success of an organization?
Well, like I said earlier, every company has a culture, whether you know it or not. And the real issue is, do you actively try and embrace and shape a culture? Do you talk about the culture that you want in your company? Do you train your employees on that culture? And do the senior leaders actually model that culture on a daily basis?
I want to ask you a couple of questions about outside of the office. What are your favorite activities to do when you're not working? And I know that you're currently retired, and I know a couple of them. But what do you like to do with your free time now?
I've got a place down on a little island called Mustang Island. I like to spend time down there either fishing or I've got 4 grandchildren now. I love to have my grandkids down there and just spend an afternoon on the beach with my grandkids.
How are you involved in the community? Is there any nonprofit work or volunteering that you currently do?
My primary residence is in Austin, Texas, and a lot of people don't realize that Austin is the largest no-kill city in the United States from an animal shelter standpoint. And one of the organizations that's a real driving force in making Austin the largest no-kill city is a group called Austin Pets Alive. And I have volunteered there for the last several years, doing everything from just going down in the morning and walking dogs to repairing some of their facilities that needed some maintenance work done on them. And it's really a very rewarding organization to be around.
Oh, that's amazing. What's something that you have not accomplished in your personal life that you look to accomplish soon?
That's a really difficult question because I'm actually at a spot where I feel pretty satisfied. I've always said I'd like to be a better golfer, but I'm not really willing to commit the kind of time at the driving range to improve my game to where I'd like it.
I'm right there with you. What is your greatest professional success?
I've always thought about it in terms of, what do you want people to say when you're gone? And, I just have really always enjoyed having people that have worked for me do really well in their own careers.
Have you ever faced a moral or ethical challenge in your career?
Probably the most relevant one I can talk to you about would be several years ago. I was running the commercial side of a power generation company, and we actually had an internal issue that was a clear violation of FERC regulations. And the reality was that we actually did not get caught by the outside. We identified it internally. And the reality is, if we would never have spoken up, I don't think anybody would have ever known. But I think it's how you behave when no one's looking that really kind of demonstrates your character. So I just kind of went with the view that there's never a wrong time to do the right thing. So we actually called FERC and self-reported our problem. They came in and did their own investigation, and they ultimately hit us with a monetary fine, which is fine. I wasn't worried about a monetary fine. But the feedback we got from FERC at the end of it was that the way we handled it is exactly how they wish the entire industry handled it.
Kevin, what sets you apart from your peers in the industry?
Oh gosh, I'd like to think what sets me apart is actually what binds me to my peers. And that's, I've always had a real interest in doing what's right for the organization ahead of my own kind of self-interest. And there's times in my career that in order to ensure one of my peers did really well, I had to kind of take a sidestep over and maybe give up some of my responsibility to help them kind of advance their own career. But I always took the view that a rising tide raises all ships. And if I could help the people around me do really well, I would do well as well.
Tell us about your management style. How do you manage people and how do you manage teams?
Well, I like working in a team environment. So I used to always say that I tried to hire people that were smarter than me until one of my guys pointed out that I really didn't have any choice. And then I actually try to just build solid teams where I view my role as to remove any obstacles that they encounter. And when things are going really well, I try and stand back and let my team get all the credit. And in difficult times, I try and kind of shield them from some of the collateral damage.
Do you have any rituals to motivate and challenge and push yourself? Or are you self-motivated? Do you have anything that you go through on a step-by-step basis every day to get you there?
I would say it's a step-by-step basis on a daily basis, but the one thing that I've always kept in my mind, and it really goes back to very early in my career, is that as industry evolves, you've got to keep your skill sets current or you'll become a bit of a dinosaur. And I think we've all worked in teams where someone on the team was a genuinely nice person. They may have had a lot of experience, but it was clear that they were the weak link on the team because they had just let their skills get a little bit rusty. And I've always feared being the weak link. I've always kind of known that at some point I probably will be the weak link, but it's always really pushed me to kind of try and keep my skills current and kind of stay up with where the industry's moved to.
Who do you admire most, both professionally and personally?
I've really benefited working with some great CEOs over my career. There's a legendary CEO by the name of Paul Anderson that ran Pan Energy and then ran BHP Billiton out of Australia. And I learned a lot from Paul in the years I was around him. And there's actually two current CEOs that are still in the industry. The CEO at Dynegy is a gentleman by the name of Bob Flexon, and the CEO at Dominion Resources is Tom Farrell. And those guys are both such solid leaders, but more importantly, they're just really kind of decent, considerate people away from the office.
Throughout your career, have you had a mentor, and have you mentored somebody else?
I've benefited from mentors my entire career, and I've always been cognizant that I have a responsibility to kind of repay that debt. And I'm always really pleased when people that I've mentored and worked with end up in senior roles in their own careers.
So I know you've accomplished a lot in your career. What was the big picture accomplishment, or is that big picture accomplishment still to come?
Well, I think the big picture for me is always I just want to leave things better than I found them. And usually when I get recruited to an organization, it's become something may have gone awry. And I've always kind of been pleased with the fact that I could kind of rally people in organizations to improve not only the business prospects, but to actually improve their own situation personally at the same time.
What's the biggest mistake you've made in your career, and what have you learned from it?
Oh gosh, I've made a ton of mistakes, but I learned a long time ago not to think of them as mistakes. I view them as potential opportunities. And to me, the question is not what mistakes you make, but how do you correct the situation to get a better outcome? And when I'm talking to younger employees, I always use the analogy that if you go out to the mountains to learn to ski, and your goal is not to fall down, you're never going to be a very good skier. We all need to fall down a few times to learn anything. So to me, it's not what mistakes you make, but how do you recover from those mistakes?
Can you tell us about a time when you've had to go pretty far outside of your comfort zone?
Oh yeah, that's back in 1998. I was running a very successful energy group in Houston, and I was offered a chance to move to Sydney, Australia, to start up a brand new region for the company. And it literally involved me giving up a very profitable group with a lot of employees in it, where when I showed up in Sydney, I was the only employee in the Sydney office. I had to find office space. I had to hire my first employee. And at the same time, I was moving my kids during their middle school years, and they weren't particularly happy about it. But when we came back to the U.S. 2 years later, we had built a very successful group there in Sydney as well, had done some asset transactions, and had actually started an energy trading group there as well. And I've kept touch with a lot of those people over the years. I've made some really good friends in that project as well.
What's the best advice that you've been given in your career?
It's actually a quote from Benjamin Franklin, but it's advice I give all the time myself now, and that is, your reputation is like fine china. It's easily broken and difficult to mend. So whether it's your professional reputation or your personal reputation, I think we all need to guard that pretty closely.
What advice would you give to up-and-coming executives as well as graduating college students?
I think the best advice I can give people at this point is just to seek out the difficult challenges. I think that's really how you differentiate yourself in the workforce is to try and find the most difficult problems the company is facing and take those on.
How have you seen business change in the span of your career?
I think the biggest change I've had to deal with over my career is just the speed of innovation has just constantly accelerated. And, the skills that we used 3 or 4 years ago are typically not the skills that we use today. And even if you look at companies that were in the Dow Jones Industrial Average 50 years ago, look at the ones that were there that are no longer even relevant today. You had companies like Bethlehem Steel, Eastman Kodak, and even companies like General Motors are just a fraction of what they used to be. So just the speed of innovation just continually accelerates, and I think that's going to, something we're all going to have to deal with.
What's the biggest challenge facing the utility and the energy industry today?
Well, for the power space, obviously, I think some of the involving environmental regulations, but a bit more subtle but maybe more interesting challenge is just this whole idea of innovation and just the amount of data that we get hit with every day, and how do you sift through all that data?
How has technology changed the business?
Well, that's kind of to my last point about technology has given us access to so much data that it can just absolutely overwhelm you. I can remember it was probably 20 years ago when I had my first email account through a corporate account, and I would get 5 or 6 emails a day. Now, a lot of people are getting 300 to 400 emails a day, and you're just getting a lot of information shoved at you electronically, and it can just run you over if you're not careful. And how do you sift through that, prioritize the data you're getting hit with, and really drive into the data that can help you move the needle in the business?
If you didn't go into business and you weren't an executive with a utility or any aspect of that industry, what would you be doing?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I actually, my last 2 years of high school were in an automotive mechanical program. I've actually got a vocational degree in auto mechanics, and I still like working with my hands. I like to build stuff. I even like to design kind of specialty tools to deal with one-off situations I find myself trying to, repair. So I would probably be doing something working with my hands.
And a couple of personal questions for you. You walk into a bar, what kind of drink do you order?
I'm typically a beer guy, particularly an IPA.
Okay. What are the last 3 books that you've read?
The Set of Watchmen book that just came out. To be honest, I found that a little bit disturbing. I was such a fan of To Kill a Mockingbird to actually see Atticus in a different light. I found it a little bit troubling. Some of the other stuff I like to read is more technical in nature. So, read a lot of mechanical type stuff.
Well, Kevin, I do appreciate you taking the time to come on DEDIC TV today.
No, I enjoy talking to you, Jason, as always.
Absolutely. We'll talk again very soon.
All right, thank you.